Welcome to the show! Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very own hip historian himself, Marshall Shore!
Well, good afternoon, and I want to welcome you to Arizona Virtual Pride, third Saturday. I'm so happy to be a part of this, and we've got a great program this afternoon. We're going to be doing a talk about That's Entertainment, looking at some of the LGBTQ plus members of our community that have been on stages throughout Arizona. I mean, when I first started doing this, I had no idea what I was going to find. Now, you might wonder, well, who is Marshall? Why is he doing this? And what's going on? So I am the project manager for the Arizona LGBT plus History Project, and working with ASU as we try to really capture as much of that LGBT history and preserve it and make it accessible. And so that's a lot of what this is trying to do, is really kind of digging down and trying to find some of those stories that have been forgotten or we need to keep sharing, because, you know, at this moment, we are not celebrating ourselves nearly enough. And so this is kind of that call to action to, you know, let's put our arms around each other and give ourselves a hug. When I first started digging into this, had no idea what I was going to find. I mean, this is my partner, Paul, and I. We moved here a little over 20 years ago from New York. And when we got here, all we kept hearing about how we were moving to a cultural wasteland. And of course, that wasn't true. But that is the view of so many people on the outside of Arizona, is that there's no arts and culture here. And that is completely a misnomer. To tell you a little bit about the History Project, one of the things we did over the summer was through downtown Phoenix, we launched a LGBTQ plus walking tour of downtown Phoenix. So if you'd like to, there is the website for that, or you can also just Google LGBTQ plus tour of downtown Phoenix, and it will pop up. There is also a component that you could actually even do it from your living room, and it will show you little videos kind of about each spot. I think there are 10 spots, and you'll get to see such places as in the mid-70s where there were two gay men. Actually, that's not on this tour. That's on a different tour. You'll actually get to see what was the 8-Day Coffee Shop, which is no longer there. But the space is just south of Roosevelt on 1st Street, and it was the 8-Day Coffee Shop, which was the site in the early 60s of a police raid, where just like what happened in Stonewall, what happened in San Francisco, I mean, when you have the Black Cat bar, you've got all these kind of riots happening. It was because of things like what was going on at the 8-Day Coffee Shop, where you had a bunch of LGBT community members hanging out, and the police raid, and they were taken to jail. Their names were published in the newspaper, and many of them, it forever changed their lives. And so you can see that spot. Sadly, we don't have any photos of that at this moment, but that's one of the reasons why we do things like this, is to try and get the word out there, because we're always looking for more to the story, because we know there is always more to the story. One of the stops is also going to be the 307, which was an iconic bar there's now a plaque inset into the concrete that really highlights the fact that in the 50s, there was a bar here that was very much a space for the LGBT community, and kind of goes into the history of some of that, as well as Ted DeGrazia, who was kind of our Andy Warhol, really had an art form and really kind of produced. So he's an iconic artist in Arizona, and he was looking for a place to drink cheaply, and he found it right here, the 307. So when it was demolished, it was full of Ted DeGrasse murals. Sadly, none of those were able to be salvaged. Even his own museum tried, and nothing worked. Also, earlier this year, we were able to have installed a headstone for a gender pioneer from 1906, who is a young Russian man who wound up passing away right here in Phoenix, even before it was a stop, even before it was a state back in 1906. We didn't become a state until 1912. So when I was starting to dig into this history, I didn't quite know what I was going to find. And let's see, there we go. Nope. And so what I was able to find was really the first time we have a female impersonator gracing a stage here in Arizona that I was able to find. That doesn't mean it was the first. Oh, and I see Pussy LeHoot is on here. She loves the 307. And I think there might even be a photo of you coming up later on at the 307. And so really the first mention that we've been able to find of a female impersonator was William Gauze, and that would have been back in 1894, back in Tombstone, if you can imagine that. It was actually part of a traveling minstrel show, and he was a young African-American man who would come out as and personify a female. And so as far as we know, that was really the first time you saw that on a stage. Now, there was also Stewart, who was known as a female Patty, or as a male Patty. Patty was a very famous opera singer, and so there were lots of clones that came up trying to mimic her. And so that's what he would do. He was from the Midwest, a post person, and then had this whole career then as a female impersonator. And then you start getting into Hollywood. I mean, in the early 1900s, across many screens across Arizona, you would find Julian Elting. And he was really one of the first celebrity drag queens or female impersonators. He took Hollywood by storm. And it was always in his movies is he would show up as a man, and through the course of the movie have a reason to then dress as a woman. And so he showed up in stages across Arizona on screens, but he also did performances, live performances. And so such as in 1913 here in Tucson, we see that he was live on a stage. Now, this was at a time where what was interesting was the fact that even though you had drag queens as a comic relief, in public, they were not seen quite so favorably. In fact, if you were caught walking the street in women's clothing, you would likely be thrown in jail or heavily harassed. But if you went into a theater and there you were on a stage, people might laugh at your jokes. And then when you fast forward, Ray Bourbon, who was really a drag queen who came out of kind of the late 20s, early 30s, and has several albums, and he traveled the country, was quite famous and quite well known. And so he graced several stages here in Arizona, including Kay Elledge, who had a bar called Kay's Happy Landing Buffet, which was one of the earliest lesbian bars, actually even one of the earliest gay bars that we can identify in Arizona. Back in the early 40s, her and her girlfriend Violet opened up this bar. And on one of his records, the back of it just lists all these places where he would perform. And Arizona pops up in several places. And what I thought was interesting was I didn't know why he kept going to Kay's Happy Landing. And then I discovered that Kay had been one of his musicians in his traveling band as he would perform. So they were good friends. And so he would always come and see Kay and perform at her little venue. Now, it was basically southern and central. And so I've been told the building no longer stands there, but you would have gone up this very narrow stairway to a little tiny club that probably didn't have air conditioning, and pack them in. And then you fast forward to the 50s, and Lee Leonard, who in the 80s owned a antique store. Cannot really find that much about him. But what I thought was interesting was not only did he perform here in Phoenix, but also in Globe, Miami. If you can imagine, I can't imagine drag in the 50s in Globe. I sure wish I could go back and see exactly what that looked like. And then, oh my gosh, if we fast forward, who has been on a stage for 40 years that we all know and love? Indeed, it is Pussy LeHoot. 40 years she has graced our stages. Now, she first started doing drag. So she actually is from Flagstaff, came down with a friend to go see a show, wasn't quite sure what she was getting herself in for, and found a drag show. And so she's been doing drag since then in a wide variety of places. Oh, and I actually cut you so that way I could put in Miss Ebony. Sorry, Pussy. And so this is Miss Ebony, another local legend drag queen who passed away a few years ago. And she performed all over the place, including bars like the 307 and Casa de Roma. There are a lot of bars. We actually did a program with bar owners. And since 1940, it looks like there have been 180 some bars just in the Valley of the Sun to now. So we're always looking for more information. And somebody just sent me the other day a new name of bar I hadn't heard before. So I've got to throw that one on the list as well to try and track down more information. And then someone who Pussy performed with a lot would have been Lady Cassandra or Daniel Dauld. So Dan was in second grade, fell in love with puppets and started making his own marionettes and putting on shows through high school. And then his dad kicked him out for being gay. And later on, a friend took him to a drag show in Detroit. And he wound up here in Phoenix and started doing drag as Lady Cassandra and did drag for quite a while. And then once he retired, Lady Cassandra started picking up the name Dan the Puppet Man. So he's done so you can see him around many performances around town, at the Great Arizona Puppet Theater, down on just below, I want to forget the name of that street, but just across from the Japanese Friendship Garden is this great old Mormon school. And so he performs there quite a bit as well. So if you want to go check out Dan the Puppet Man, you can do that. And then when you kind of fast forward to some of the current drag that's going on, you've got Javen Monroe, or Dali, who was one of the original cast members of the Queer Agenda. He has also been featured on Dragula. And I love that in this whole time of COVID, that one of the things he is doing, he has started doing these kind of health/sex videos to just promote healthy and safer sex. So I love the fact that he's gone and taking his performance skills and doing a whole new, more informative thing with them. And then another queen, Sonia. What I love about her is, you can never tell a book by its cover. Not only is she Miss Gay Arizona and Georgia USA at large, but she's also getting ready to work and restore her ranchero. So, you can never judge a book by the cover. And then, of course, there is Barbara Seville. So Barbara first got involved with kind of theater was when she was with Phoenix Gay Youth Group, which actually, until I had talked to Barbara, had never even heard that name before. It was a precursor of Voight, which was Valley 1 in 10, which then became 1 in 10. It was even before that. And they did an event at the Alwyn House. And so that was kind of Barbara's first exposure to that stage. And so if you're so inclined, you can also go on and you can get a Please Barbara jockstrap t-shirt stickers galore. She can help outfit you for the summer. When we talk about the Alwyn House, they started doing back in 1971. Now, since that, so what I love about them is they are really, so it's pronounced all one. Because even back, they are getting ready for their 50th anniversary. And they've always been inclusive of artists, performers, non-discriminatory, a very open, diverse audience. They do a lot of display of trans, bisexual art, as well as performances by those artists. And they've really been doing that since the day they opened. They hosted the first gay art show in Phoenix, and that was with Bob Hagee, who had our Hagee Gallery, which was kind of a gift shop, but he also had art in there as well. And the first drag queen to grace the stage of the Alwyn House was Penelope Poupée. Now, Penelope was involved with just at the turn of the year, they do the Exotic Erotic Ball, which I think they're now coming up on their 36th one. And so she graced the stage on that very first one. And it's always one of those events that I think is not to be missed because you have such a wide, diverse group of performers on stage as well as in the audience. And then I was lucky enough to sit down with Steve Schemmel. Steve Schemmel, back in the late 70s, was asked by Dignity, which is a Catholic gay organization. Basically, they said, hey, let's put on a show. So they had problems finding rehearsal space. And actually, the Black Theater Troupe stepped up and said, hey, why don't you come and use our space? Which they did. And they were also at that point called Theater for Gays. And they then wound up moving to a church to do rehearsals in, and they wrote the first check for the rent, and they couldn't take it because the church said, it says Theater for Gays. We can't take it because it has the word gay in the title. So they then had to come up with a whole new thing. And so it was called the Janus Theater. They did a lot of performances over at the Black Theater with the Black Theater Troupe space. They also, at the same spot where you can go see Daniel perform now over at the Puppet Theater, they were also there performing. So they performed all over the valley in those locations, kind of downtown central, bringing a lot of performers to the stage, for many for the first time, and really developing an early theater program here involving the LGBT community. One of the shows they did was The Ritz, and the star of that was actually Tish Tanner, who was another local famous drag queen. And I'm sure Pussy LeHoot has all kinds of stories about her, which I hopefully at some point we can just sit down and have her share some of those stories about some of the queens that are no longer around, which would be a lot of fun. Maybe even doing a panel of that would be great. They also did a production of a show called As Is, which was really one of the first AIDS stage performances. But what was interesting was Steve had a boyfriend who was good friends with the director of As Is. So when it closed on Broadway, within a week, it was actually now on a Phoenix stage, which is kind of unheard of, to have a regional theater being able to put on something post-Broadway so quickly after Broadway. Now, they also did Boys in the Band, and I can't imagine what the general population must have, the irks probably, and the threats that they would get as they were doing some of these shows. Now, they also did Torch Song Trilogy, which is Harvey Fierstein. And they always, whenever I was looking for information, I always kept finding these little odd bits. And I finally found out why, and that's because they did two performances of Torch Song. They did the first act, which was Widows and Children First. And they did that because there was a woman named here that we'll talk on in a little bit about, Rusty Warren, who was actually good friends with Harvey Fierstein, who wanted to play that role. And so he let her do that before it even went to Broadway. And then once it went to Broadway and was a huge success, they then brought back Torch Song Trilogy, all three pieces, to create that stage performance. And they operated for 8 years and did 35 productions. So into the mid 80s. And then, and actually, I just found out I'm actually wrong with this. I didn't realize Invisible Theater has been around for 50 years, but they've been doing productions in Tucson for at least 35 years. Now, what I love about Sue Clausen is she is such a talent. And so right now they have a Dr. Ruth Westheimer play where she actually plays Dr. Ruth, including the voice, as well as she has done an amazing production with Edith Head. Edith Head was a Hollywood designer for the stars, helped dress so many celebrities and give them their iconic looks. That was all Edith Head. And she does an entire performance as Edith Head, including taking questions from the audience. And she has taken that around the globe. I know she did take it to Edinburgh as well as other places. And they are getting ready for a great season in Tucson as well. And then you have folks, some of you may know Ian from some of the trivia that he does around town, or see him on our stage here, but he has also done a wide variety of cabaret work as well as working with opera companies across the country, helping them put on their stage performances. And then it was interesting because when I started talking to people about music, you know how kind of the universe is just kind of saying, hey, you know, there's this synergy here. I had a friend who brought up the name Chupa, which was an early 80s kind of event in Phoenix that was downtown that was a club. I mean, you had Eddie Amador, who had been working at the Works. And he was the resident DJ there, and he started his own kind of this chupa. And so they did a wide variety of things. It really was kind of, I think, the first foray into a really decadent club. It's like you would walk in and you would be playing videos of Mexican S&M interspersed with other things and really creating this whole environment that was really indicative of just kind of downtown, this cutting edge scene. Since then, Eddie Amador has gone on to work with Madonna, Yoko Ono, Donna Summer, Michael Bublé. Now, even though Eddie, though himself is not gay, the club that they had was very supportive of the community and actually wound up closing down because some local straight guys started kind of infiltrating the club and not being very supportive or nice, and gunshots were fired. And so at that point, for the safety of themselves and the community, they decided to shut the club down. But he is still famous around the world. And then, oh my gosh, then you have Dan Guerrero. Dan, who just released a documentary, self-produced, about his life called Gaytino. So his dad was Lalo Guerrero, who is considered by many to be kind of the godfather of Chicano music. Dan was born in Tucson, and as his dad's celebrity grew, wound up moving to LA, where Dan still resides, and he is kind of a theater agent to Hispanic stars. But Dan is a great guy. They actually did the Phoenix premiere of Gaytino in Tucson, but he was recently, earlier this year, before we went into kind of a shutdown, it was also shown at the Sedona Film Festival. And so I was able to go up there and see it and hang out with Dan for a little bit. And then when you talk about music or stage performance, there's my friend Brad Chandler, or better known as Mix X. So Miss X was part of kind of in the 80s, a group called Sluts A Go-Go. He then went on to be in the space sci-fi movie, and I'm suddenly realizing it's like my slide didn't come up with the image it should have. So the movie he was in was called Vegas in Space. And so Brad has also graced the stage here and in San Francisco. Lee Crow, who grew up here in the Valley, and for Halloween one year here, dressed up as Elvis Presley. And it was such a huge hit that Lee developed this whole persona called Elvis Herselvis. At that point, she was the only female impersonator sanctioned by Graceland. And so she traveled around as Elvis for different performances. Wound up actually on a stage with another one of the Presley family members, and there was an issue, and so her sanction from Graceland was actually pulled because of that, but she still is around. Her and her girlfriend do Dandy, which is a regular kind of drag king review in San Francisco. Lee also does a wide variety of stage performances with cross-gender bending shows, so here she is as Captain Kirk as well. She also has a current band called Velveta, and they just released their new album in early August. And so Miss X is also featured on this album as well under the name of Chad Wrangler. So it's kind of a play, and they have a really great song about Jacob Waltz. So, but I love that Lee is around and that we are kind of the home of a drag king pioneer. And then I think when you kind of counterbalance that pioneer with kind of the new age of drag king, I mean, you have Eddie Broadway. I mean, when you look at his list of accomplishments, Mr. Trans USA 2020, Emperor 8 of the Imperial Court of Arizona. He was also USA of A male illusionist, as well as a Mr. Phoenix Pride. He does a wide variety of performances of drag kings, as well as AFEM folks. I know I've seen a couple of those shows over at Boycott, but I love how he has really become a member and leader of the community. I mean, I can remember when he went to one of his first competitions, his first national competitions, and lost, and really got in his mind that he wanted to excel. And he has done such a great job of being part and leading that community. And such a great member of our community. And then we get to talk about Rusty Warren. So Rusty was a comedian. And, you know, when I started researching this, I didn't realize we had such a comedy history here in Arizona. So Rusty was a big comedian here in the 50s. She played around town, including places like the Pomp Room. And she had a hit song called Knockers Up that took her across the country to the point where she was admitted into the Library of Congress as the birth mother of the sexual revolution for her song Knockers Up. And she just turned 90 not that long ago. So she is still with us. And she was performing on a lot of stages across the valley, doing a variety of fundraisers for ARC, which was an early LGBT community center. And she also brought with her, she had gone in the Midwest to go see a group called Fono Fools. Now, up until this time, drag queens or female impersonators really used their own voices. So she saw this group called Fono Fools, and they actually did a lot of lip syncing to her records, or as they called it, record pantomime. And she enjoyed it so much, she took her manager, and they actually were able to book them here in Scottsdale at the Interlude, a club that no longer stands. I really want to thank the Queer Music Archive for this, because I had never heard of Fono Fools. And one of the Fono Fools, they actually have kind of his whole photo album. So Pussy LeHoot, we should do this with your photo album, is just kind of document it all and put it all in one place so that way everybody can just see all those different bars, all the different performers that you went with, and start maybe attaching little stories to those. So that would be a really fun project. And when you start talking about the comedy history, I recently attended a kind of a bootleg backyard comedy show. And that's where I met Tony Tripoli. So Tony has been a comedian, grew up here. When he was done performing, I actually mentioned to him Rusty Warren, and he actually had worked with her in high school. But he grew up here, wound up becoming a comedian in LA, and actually becoming part of the show Fashion Police with Joan Rivers. And so you have folks like Tony Tripoli. You have such a kind of a growing comedy scene here. You have Trajan Dunkley, who is a bi person of color, who is a great comedian here as well as Jesse Ever, as well as Sandra Bernhard, who grew up here in the Valley. So she moved here when she was 10. She has you probably know her from Roseanne, where she was one of the earliest reoccurring characters on a TV sitcom. She also has appeared on Will and Grace and a variety of other TV shows. But you might not realize she also has a slew of comedy albums as well as music albums with her singing, as well as she's got several books out as well, talking about her life as well. So, and a lot of those formative years were right here in Arizona. And Daryl Redleaf Fielder. So he kind of broke his chops here at Casa de Roma, where he was one of the dancers. He wound up getting into makeup and has worked on a bunch of movies as well as TV shows. Probably one of his longest running TV shows is Mad About You, the first incarnation as well as the second incarnation, as well as a slew of Hollywood movies with a variety of budgets. But he is native born here and raised right here in Arizona. And then when you start talking about dancing in Arizona, if you talk to a lot of people, the first name to come up will be Quentin Jenkins, who again kind of got his chops at Casa de Roma, really one of the first show bars here in the Valley. He is a former jazz and ballet dancer, was a Ford model, was a regular on American Bandstand, and has gone on to work with music legends such as Charo, Martha Walsh, and Deborah Harry. Now, he has an amazing friend, Luis Aragola. And so I met Luis, who goes more by the name of Wheezy, who has been on the Phoenix Mercury hip hop squad for 12 years and has been their coach. He's also been part of the Phoenix Suns working for the Solar Squad. He also has developed his own dance company called Epic Dance Company. So I love that there is so much dance history in the Valley, but I'm always shocked when I find more than what you expect. I mean, if you've seen any performances around town, Gio Johnson's always out there. I mean, his long list of accolades, as he's always kind of pushing himself to evolve. You can see him a lot of times on Thursday nights. You have Loteria. And so you can watch and have him play Mexican bingo. And one of the things I love is that he's done this amazing Freddie Mercury. He's always pushing himself to excel in the world of dance right here in Arizona. And again, also be a leader as well. But then you also have Satan's Angel. So Satan's Angel, back in the 60s, was a burlesque performer. She was top tier. She was Vegas and traveling the country. She recently passed away, but in the 80s, her career kind of stalled. And she wound up moving here to Arizona. And she was selling jewelry out of a little, basically, I think in Chandler, and befriended Terry Earp, who was the daughter of the wife of Wyatt Earp, a direct descendant of Wyatt Earp. And so Terry was a playwright and wound up writing a play about Satan's Angel and kind of her career. And so basically her career became revived because of her time here in Arizona. She actually traveled the globe teaching teaching burlesque, she was known as the Queen of the Fire Tassels. So that's why I showed this image. So she would pop her top down, and she would then take a martini and dunk the tassels off of her pasties, and she would then light them on fire and spin them. Now, she would travel and teach this skill to other people. The last event she was at, she was actually teaching a young man that sadly there was no video for. I would love to have seen fire tassels on a man. And actually, she was supposed to be at an event here in Phoenix, and she canceled because she wasn't feeling well. And that would have been the last time she would have been on stage. And then David Hallberg, who studied ballet right here at Ballet, Arizona. He then went on to work with the American Ballet Theater, as well as Bolshoi. He actually was the only American dancer to be on both stages at the same time. It was just announced that he was the new artistic director for the Australian Ballet Company. And, and I always love talking to people because they always say, hey, but you forgot. And so I did a presentation recently, a short version of this for the Gay Chamber. And one of the members said, hey, what about Jock Soto? I had not heard the name Jock Soto before, but Jock was born on the Navajo reservation in the mid-60s, a Navajo mother, a Puerto Rican father, and he was really raised in a time where ballet dancing for boys was not really something that happened, especially in his world. So following the footsteps of his mom, he developed hoop dancing as his talent. But at the age of 5, he saw a ballet performance and fell in love and was hooked. And so he studied here in Phoenix and was the last dancer hired by Balanchine, probably one of the most famous ballet dancers. And this was at the age of 16. So here you have Jock Soto suddenly now on his own in New York City at the age of 16. He was mixing up with folks like Andy Warhol and really kind of coming of age. And so here you can see the 4 images here are Andy Warhol did a famous series of Polaroids. And so Jock Soto, these are the Polaroids of Jock. But his story doesn't stop there. He also had a PBS documentary done on him called Water Flowing Together. As well as he wrote a book called Every Step You Take, as well as even he co-authored a cookbook. Now, his boyfriend and him got married, Luis Fuentes, they got married back in 2011, and their wedding was featured in the New York Times vows column, which was pretty cutting edge for that early to be featured in such a major cross-the-country news thing. So thank you so much for joining us. Are there any questions? If you have the chat, please feel free to throw in questions or comments. A lot of times that's how I get my best information, is by sharing those stories, those images. I mean, that's how I found out about Jock. And look forward to getting a chance to delve more into his story as well. Now, I've also started doing on Thursday nights the Arizona History Happy Hour as a way to tell stories and to capture other stories across Arizona. Actually, we had Pussy LeHoot on in June for kind of a gay pride edition. Looking at doing some other panels and things like that coming up. So also, if you have any ideas for panels, one of the things we're trying to do right now is small towns. Kind of what is it like being LGBTQ in a small town? Myself, growing up in a small town of about 25 people. And across Arizona, you have some really tiny towns that are kind of that size, of even under 1,000 people. And just kind of what is that experience like? You can also reach out through these places and say, hey, I've got an idea. If you want to email me, you can do that at hello@hiphistorian.com. If you could also go on Facebook and like AZ Gay History, that is, as well as on Instagram, that is where we push out programming and other things that are happening. I know we've talked about doing a variety of things, especially now that everything has gone virtual. So we're doing oral histories. And so just trying to collect more and more stories. Now, if you would like to help the Arizona History Project do even more, there you can see my Venmo, as well as if you'd like to send money through Phoenix Pride, there is a website right there. If you'd like these things, let me know, and I am happy to share them. This is such an exciting program to put together, because who knew how much history there was? And I know there are still people popping up that I'm like, I don't have time to include in this. So I'm looking forward to doing a part 2 of That's Entertainment about the LGBTQ plus community right here in Arizona, and how much we have really given. I know with Pussy LeHoot, we did a program that you can also find on Facebook as well as YouTube that was bringing together Diane Daniels, Pussy LeHoot, Quentin Jenkins, talking about performers in the 80s and how did they respond to the HIV/AIDS crisis. And so you can go on there and take a look at that presentation as well as others. And that's all watching. Hey, I'm glad to see we have somebody coming in from Tucson. That's great. Would love to include more from Tucson, because I know that it's like there's a lot of history down there. So we need to work more across the state. I know I've talked to some folks at NAU about doing some stuff there, as well as even Bisbee. Last year we unrolled a Trans History of Arizona timeline that we unrolled in Bisbee. And the goal was to really get it to Yuma, but because of kind of the mess we're in, that was canceled and didn't happen. So please, people, reach out if you'd like to share stories. If you have photos, I actually, from Davina, got a collection of things that had belonged to Miss Ebony. And so those will be going off to ASU into the archives. Now they are doing things like scanning a lot of those early periodicals from the mid-70s to now, and starting to actually upload some of those, and they'll be public accessible. And David says, there is a whole, let's see, and we can actually do that. And David's talking about that, since we were chatting about some of the drag king history right here, that there is a king show coming up tonight at 8:00 as part of Arizona Virtual Pride third Saturday. So, I honestly love all the programming that's going on, and really kind of sharing that experience with people. So that way you can see performances now from your home. Because, at this moment, I know I've been having a bad week. And so I'm really enjoying the opportunity to just be a part of the community and see people on stage. I miss getting a chance to hang out with people and to see performers. I love that a lot of folks, including Pussy LeHoot on her Sunday show, are going virtual, as well as Barbara, as well as the Queer Agenda. So there's a lot of things going on, and that's kind of the great thing about going on now, is you don't have to leave your house to be able to see some really cutting edge performances. And so that was the fun of doing this, was kind of trying to look at what were we doing? What are we doing now? I know I've left out some Las Vegas performers that have grown up out of the Phoenix or Arizona community. And I'm sure there's more that not even aware of. And that is the fun of doing this, is finding those stories that people are just like, hey, did you know? And it was funny, just did a conversation with someone who was here in the early 80s wound up moving to Seattle, but was talking about one of the first prides as he's marching down the street with his partner. On the sidelines, they see the KKK in full white sheets standing there, not being supportive, but making their presence known. And that's one of those stories I had never heard about those early prides. I mean, we had talked about some of those early prides. There were boxes, there were taped off areas. And if you were standing in that box, you were not supposed to be photographed, because that was still a time where you could be fired just by showing up at a pride event. My other half, Paul, he is right now teaching in Shanghai, and Shanghai Pride, because of all this, was actually canceled. And he was able to go to some small events for Shanghai Pride. He went to one event and he said there were about 20 people in a room. A lot of them were wearing buttons that said, basically was a camera with a slash through it, so don't photograph them. But he said as people were walking in, some of them said, I've never seen this many gay people all in one space. So in terms of just kind of that equity across the globe, we have so much more room to go. But thank you all so much for joining me as we get a chance to talk about LGBTQ history throughout Arizona. Look forward to doing more programs. Thank you again to Arizona Virtual Pride, David Boyles, and all those other volunteers that really make this possible, because this is a huge undertaking. I mean, just putting together one performance is enough, but trying to herd all those cats and get them on your screen all at the same time is kind of an incredible feat of what they're trying to do. So again, thank you so much for being here, and have a great rest of your day. And I know there's programming coming up, so please stick around, and I'm sure you'll see, I know we have the Drag King review coming up, as well as other events. So stick around for more fun and entertainment. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day and evening. Oh God, did we cut out? So that's going to be one of the issues, is I don't know. Oh, I think we're still going because it's not ending. Yep, it's still going.